Hi guys, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to another episode of Happy Chirp. Today I have with me Fatima Hussain. पहले आ चुकी हैं ये podcast पे. She's a therapist, but I would like her to tell us first what kind of therapy she practices, and then we'll get into a lot of questions with her. हम लोगों ने Instagram पे आप लोगों से सवाल solicit किए थे, and we got some really interesting questions for you. And I will be presenting those to Fatima. And we'll see what she has to say about them as she is a professional. How are you, Fatima?
I'm good. Thank you for having me again.
Thank you for taking out the time to do this with me again. मैंने start में बोल दिया था फातिमा को when we did our podcast before that I will have you again. अच्छा, so Fatima, can you first tell us what sort of therapy do you do?
So I'm a psychotherapist, sometimes called a counselor depending on where you are.
Okay.
I work with individuals over 16, couples and families also a little bit.
Achha.
So yeah, and the kind of training that I have is psychodynamic and person-centered. That's what my master's is in. I've done a bunch of other things since then. I've trained in EMDR. I am currently training in systemic family therapy. Couples के लिए मैंने train किया. Attachment पे I did some work. So yeah, I do a bunch of different things. So there's never an easy way to answer that question.
It's very layered.
Yeah. It's very layered. But what I offer is relational therapies is how I
would like to describe it in simple words.
Yes.
Achha, that's interesting because some of the questions that we got, they were mostly about stuff like that,
Mm-hmm.
you know, family settings and joint family system and I think कि वो हमारे culture का एक बहुत बड़ा हिस्सा है that plays into the mental health of a lot of people. And लोगों को, और क्योंकि इतनी सारी चीज़ें हमारे कल्चर में नॉर्मलाइज्ड भी हैं कि यू नो बस इसी तरह होता है, फैमिली में तो यूँ ही होता है, या शौहर भी ऐसे ही होता है और सासें भी ऐसे ही होते हैं और जो भी बहुत सारी चीज़ें कॉम्प्रोमाइज़ या बट एट द एंड ऑफ द डे वी आर ऑल ह्यूमंस और वो जो भी चीज़ें हैं वो आपको इंटरनली अफेक्ट कर रही होती हैं. लिटिल बाय लिटिल दे आर डिस्ट्रॉइंग योर मेंटल हेल्थ. सो आई थिंक सम पीपल आस्क्ड कि जॉइंट फैमिली सिस्टम्स में जो टॉक्सिक बिहेवियर्स होते हैं, हाउ डू यू सॉर्ट ऑफ डील विद दैट? बिकॉज आई थिंक इसमें बहुत सारी चीज़ें फिर आ जाती हैं कि बाउंड्रीज सेट करना और तमीज़ के दायरे में भी रहना. सो कैन वी टॉक अ बिट अबाउट दैट? डू यू हैव एनी थॉट्स ऑन दैट?
I have many thoughts. Okay. I have lots of thoughts on that. And I think for me, I didn't train in Pakistan, so my training in many ways, even though it was very focused on diversity and difference, was very Eurocentric, as is most counseling training. So when I moved here, I had a couple of years of अच्छा, you know, जो सीखा है वही apply करना, and then I realized some of those things just don't work for us. Because essentially जो आपके पास clients आ रहे होते हैं, more often than not, they're the only ones in their family who are going to therapy, right? So वो पूरे family का काम वो कर रहे होते हैं therapy room में. So आप सिर्फ उनके साथ काम नहीं कर रहे होते, आप उनकी families के साथ भी काम कर रहे होते हैं indirectly. And you also have to really test this system that they're in. Can it handle the change that they're trying to bring in themselves and in the system? And that's a very tricky thing to manage. So, coming back to your question about shadi and expectations in joint family systems. Personally, I have not lived in a joint family system, so like मेरा कोई lived experience नहीं है उसका. But what I do see, and of course I will be speaking from a woman's perspective because most of my clients are women, and I think that's just the narrative I'm more familiar with. So I apologize if it doesn't cover, you know, men's perspective of this. But होता ये कि जब शादी होती है, if that's kind of the transition we're talking about, right? And I think it's particularly difficult for our generation because we're kind of straddling that very difficult place between being kind of independent women and partners and sort of this egalitarian position in the marriage, and also being bahus and you know, doing all the things that bahus do, right? So एक वो बहुत डिफ़िकल्ट चीज़ होती है, या आप वेस्टर्न उसमें एक पाँव आपका उधर है, एक ईस्टर्न उसमें है, एंड देन यू काइंड ऑफ फिगरिंग आउट कि हाउ डू आई डू ऑल द थिंग्स दैट आई वांट टू डू, बी द वुमन दैट आई वांट टू बी, एंड आई स्टिल एम a good bahu, a good wife, a good mother. And I think for our mothers that transition was a little bit different because I don't think उनके लिए इतना बड़ा conflict था. उनको ये था कि बस दोनों चीज़ें करनी है. It was more of a thing of you know, management. Right? If they can manage the outside, if they're working, and they can manage the inside, and that was their main conflict, I think. For us, it feels more of a personal conflict, I think. Okay, this is my identity. How do I make sense of it? Do I give up my work? All of those things. So depending on what's happening, what I do notice, some of the themes that come up are women particularly, if they're going into a joint family शादी के बाद or living with the in-laws, they have this और वो बहुत ज़्यादा reinforce भी होता है society से कि आपने अपने आप को over extend करना है, आपने पूछ के जाना है कि अम्मी मैं बाहर जा रही हूँ, आपने खाने में help करनी है, आपने meals बनानी है, आपने kitchen की responsibility संभालनी है. So I think वो एक जो that kind of very traditional cultural expectation of this is my role, and then this thing of actually मैंने 9 से 5 बजे काम पे जाना है और उसके बाद आके I just want to be in my room and I don't want to see anybody. That brings a lot of conflict.
Yes.
So yeah.
Have you had clients like that?
All the time.
Okay. And do you think कि ज़्यादातर जो उनका problem है वो identity की वजह से आता है?
I think mismatched expectations की वजह से आता है. उनकी expectations अपने आप से, ससुराल वालों की, उनसे, partners की, and I think this kind of inbuilt thing of wanting to not disappoint anybody, right? And making sure कि हम हर चीज़ करें. I think the most important piece of advice I would offer, and I know this from my couples work also, is कि जो टोन आपकी शादी के पहले 2-3 सालों में सेट हो जाती है, that determines a lot of the relationship. When people come in, say 7 years after they've been married, they're still working with वो चीज़ें जो शादी के पहले साल दूसरे साल में हुई. So that's very important. And if you're feeling like आपसे उस वक्त boundaries आप नहीं draw कर रहे, कि अच्छा बस अभी जगह बना लें वाला एक concept होता है ना कि पहले साल don't say anything, दूसरे साल don't say anything. And I think it's very important to build boundaries from the
start.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Because if you don't do that, वो uncomfortable होता है. I know it's very difficult to be in that position where you're like, नहीं मैंने नहीं करना, या this is not a responsibility I'm going to take on, या whatever. But वो उस वक्त का discomfort is kind of allowing for a lot more flexibility later in life.
अच्छा.
और अगर तब नहीं आप करते तो वही फिर वो साइकिल एक ऑफ रिजेंटमेंट और कुड़ना और
एंड आई थिंक लाइक इफ यू डोंट ड्रॉ दैट बाउंड्री इन द स्टार्ट उतना ही मुश्किल होता जाता है ओवर टाइम
बिकॉज लोगों के लिए कि वो एक्सपेक्टेशन सेट हो चुकी होती है ना
राइट कि दिस इज नॉट दीज आर नॉट द थिंग्स यू से एंड दिस इज नॉट हाउ यू बिहेव एंड सडनली व्हेन यू आर डूइंग दैट it's worse.
yeah suddenly they're like she was fine like for 2 years ab kya hua hai yeah. And then that stirs shit up a little bit.
Acha, interesting, because when I first got married, so I thought about this a lot ke should I sort of like put those boundaries now, क्योंकि फिर मुझे अपनी पूरी ज़िंदगी है ऐसे गुजारनी पड़ेगी and stuff. And उस time पे what I learned in my case was, and I think it really depends on like people as well, कि मुझे इस तरह feel हुआ कि okay, I had to put in some effort first to sort of gain that trust that hey, I'm not just downright evil, or like bad, like gain that trust, and then जब आपका trust और अच्छा relationship build हो जाता है, then you can start sort of like extending and like pushing yourself and your boundaries. And I'd say that in many cases that sort of worked for me, but I know that doesn't work for everyone. I feel like it really depends. वही बात है, like you said, family के साथ आप पूरा
it really depends on that. And also I think again this is a cultural thing, right? Like the onus of making her space is on the woman who's moving into the family, not the family who's allowing her into the wo. So you're right, there's this cultural thing of win them over, win their trust, and then once you're a part of them, to wo hai. So my advice would not be only for women. I think it's for families who are welcoming other members in whatever way. It's your job to create space for them.
Yes.
And it's your job to accommodate that transition, because it's a big transition, a bigger one for the woman than for anybody else.
Agreed. Okay, I want to ask you, why do you think a lot of the times, why do you think these issues happen in the first place? कि जब शादी होती है, so it's mostly between saas bahu, right? And why do you think that sort of issue even comes up?
So again, there's no one kind of answer that fits the solution, but हर family में एक dysfunction होता है, right? Or if we look at family as systems, and that's something I've become recently quite interested in, you see कि जब भी कोई change या transition होता है, जैसे बच्चे college जा रहे हैं, कोई death हो गई है, कोई नया बंदा आ रहा है, कोई बच्चा पैदा हो रहा है, those are all changes to the system, right? Like it's a reorganization of it. And that will stir up all of those latent things a little bit also. So it's not as simple as that they're fighting over the same man, essentially. But unfortunately, because of, I'm not saying this is true for everyone, but in a lot of families, what I do see is that sons kind of become step-in husbands to their mothers, right? They're doing all of those emotional responsibilities of the father because the father is out earning or whatever. So वो एक dependence या एक companionship वो अपने बेटों से सीख कर रहे होते हैं a lot of the times. And obviously it's a threat, it's a change, it's a transition. वो तो है ही, सबके लिए uncomfortable है. But I don't think a lot of people are aware of how threatening that is for them on a deeper level. वैसे तो हर कोई कहता है हम अपने बेटे के लिए बहू ढूंढ रहे हैं, और बेटे के लिए नहीं, मतलब बेटे के लिए बीवी ढूंढ रहे हैं, अपने लिए बहू ढूंढ रहे हैं. But I don't think they're kind of prepared for what that entails.
Yeah,
a lot of
it's an entire human being who's going to come and take their space and bring their baggage also.
Yeah.
True, right? Like वो हर कोई अपने हर पूरा सामान लेके आता है, अपने emotional सामान.
Not Jahez, I hope not.
Yes, I meant the emotional load, they
लोग
bring
अपनी बेटी भी दें और सोफे सेट भी दें, like that to me is ridiculous.
It's ridiculous, right? तो वो भी आ रही है, और वो भी एक expectation के साथ आ रही है. And quite frankly, मतलब जब वो लड़की आ रही है शादी होके, तो she is very anxious and she is very scared. Just इस बात पे, where you said कि family की responsibility है to sort of make that space for them. I feel like that's ये चीज़ है ना जो कोई realize ही नहीं करता. Because they're expecting, I don't know if they're expecting, but somehow उनके जहन में ये है कि वो आएगी और वो अपनी वो हमारी फैमिली में ना सेट होगी, और वो देखेगी हम कैसे करते हैं, और वो फिगर आउट करेगी और वो सेट होगी. या ये होता है कि वो कॉम्प्रोमाइज करके सीखे, या हम उसको ट्रेन करेंगे. There is no
accepting her for an individual that she is.
She is, and मतलब how she likes to live or what her life is. It's like so आपको वो जो accommodating वाला part है, and obviously जो बंदा, आप सोचो कि जो बंदा बाहर से अंदर आ रहा है, जो अकेला आ रहा है, और एक फैमिली ऑलरेडी एग्जिस्ट करती है, तो वो ज़्यादा वल्नरेबल पोजीशन में.
Of course, and this friend of mine who's a couples therapist and has been doing this for 10-11 years in Pakistan.
अच्छा.
Gives this example of like शादी होती है, आप अगले दिन उठते हैं and you don't know कि उनके घर में नाश्ता कैसे सर्व होता है. Like does everybody eat on the table? Does everybody go greet the dadi first? Is breakfast brought into the rooms? Is everybody eating separately? Something that small is just so disorienting and so confusing, because for the guy, he's done this all his life. It's not even something he feels like he needs to explain. And suddenly you're in this thing and you're like, what the hell do I do? Yeah. How do I manage this?
Yeah, I like that every step is confusing, right? What do I do? So I think उसमें ये है कि ज़ाहिर है जो बंदा ज़्यादा vulnerable है और confused है, उसको आप comfortable करते हो, rather than कि आप उसे intimidate करो और उसको ये freak out करो, या तुमसे figure out क्यों नहीं हो रहा, like या ताने देना शुरू कर दो, like
it's a power thing, right?
It's a power thing.
It's a power thing. It's I think all of us have that side to us where we do abuse power, and we all have that potential to do it. I think it's just important to catch ourselves from doing it. अच्छे लोग होते हैं, बुरे लोग होते हैं. I think everybody has
it's human.
It's human. It's part of human existence and human nature. But yeah, I think if in many cases Sasein feel like that is the only power they have in the house.
Yes.
Now I'm in a position of power, and perhaps I've not felt like that before.
Yeah. I think जो वो घर है और उसका सारा जो था, that was always like the only part of. I think it's also because especially जब आप वर्किंग वूमन नहीं हो और आपने पूरी ज़िंदगी अपना घर को दिया और घर सेट किया और फैमिली सिस्टम्स बनाए और बच्चों को रेज़ किया, and you've done all that. It's your identity.
Yeah.
It is your entire identity, and then somebody new comes in and has their own ways, or just somebody new comes in.
Yeah, that itself is a big enough threat.
It's suddenly a hit to your like identity, and you feel threatened.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Because it does require change, right? And I think हमारा जो एक conflict है वो यही है कि शादी करनी भी है, but also everything that comes with it is very difficult and challenging for people to take on. So लड़कियों के माँ बाप का भी यही होता है कि शादी करनी है and the pressure that women experience to become likable, but also they're aware of how demeaning that whole process is. But somehow this शादी करनी है becomes this overarching thing that then अच्छा बस वो हो जाए, फिर बाकी जो मैस है वो वो तो होता ही है,
उसकी खैर है,
उसकी खैर है.
हाँ. So I think we had a rishta related question as well. What was that question, Fatma?
We had several rishta related questions.
Okay.
One was how to kind of how to find a partner, what to look for in a partner. I thought that was a good question. Then there was obviously how to resist rishta pressure. And somebody, I think the person who had sent it in said they were 23 and they were experiencing it. Again, I don't want to pathologize and say कि मसला आप में है कि आपको समझ नहीं आ रही, आपने रिश्ता प्रेशर कैसे वो करना है, उसके साथ डील करना है. I think it's a systemic and cultural thing. जब तक I do think कि हमारी generation and when we become parents might be a little different about this, but it's also really important to remember कि शादी ना ज़िंदगी का शुरू है ना ख़त्म है. It's not an achievement. It's most definitely not an achievement. It's not a measure of success or failure. And शादी is great. Companionship is great, but it's definitely something that should be a choice. Instead of feeling like I have to get married or else, मतलब वो लोगों के लिए milestone बन गया है ना कि और शायद हमेशा से था कि यूनिवर्सिटी ख़त्म की तो बस अब शादी. And then you kind of sit in that limbo for many years. I would really encourage people to just figure out who they are, develop interests, because it's healthy for marriage also for you to have things outside that are just yours.
That are just yours.
Yeah.
हाँ, I think कि वो हमारे culture में that obsession with शादी is very difficult. और वो फिर pressure जो आप अपने बच्चों के ऊपर डालते हो, and then I think it really affects their self-esteem.
Oh, of course. And my therapist, I'm smiling because I'm thinking of something he said. He said कि पूरी दुनिया में Halloween और Christmas होता है, हमारे यहाँ शादी season होता है, right?
Yes.
So you put on a costume, you sit on the stage.
Oh my God.
And people who've been to 3 other weddings that week will, come in, not remember a thing about it, but in your head it becomes this big thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's entertainment.
It's entertainment. हाँ, अब तो शादी को, oh my God, the shadis that I'm seeing. It's like, there's no limit to this stuff. And I think इसी वजह से, I'd have to say, because शादी in itself, वैसे ही हम obsessed हैं कि with marriage, अब हम wedding से भी obsessed हो गए हैं, और
Instagrammable wedding.
हाँ, और उसकी वजह से like you're making it a bigger deal, because you're putting that pressure out there, like sort of even more and more. I mean, I'm not saying कि ठीक है जो लोग जैसे अपनी शादियाँ करना चाहते हैं वो ना करें, but I'm just saying कि that unfortunately that's also adding to this pressure, when you're watching कि अच्छा ये सब हो रहा है and everybody's getting married, and getting married is like the greatest thing. But एक चीज़ मैंने notice की है, जैसे होता है, you spend more time thinking about your wedding than your marriage.
Oh yeah, that is absolutely like a very important conversation to have. And again, as that friend of mine puts it, beyond the band, Baja and Baraat, because वो 3 दिनों की event है, 6 दिनों का if you're really kind of pushing it. But it's so insignificant in the grand scheme of things.
And the worst part is that you're spending more time thinking about that, rather than really thinking about अच्छा मेरी शादी होगी तो like आगे क्या है, and talking about the right things and having the right conversations, which actually I thought I'll ask you as well. What do you think are some of the important conversations that people need to have before they get into this sort of thing?
So I have my answers to that, but I also would say that depending on the context you are meeting somebody in, I understand that a lot of these things may not be possible in a arranged rishta kind of thing. आप कह रहे हैं कि आपने बच्चे पैदा करने हैं कि नहीं करने हैं, that may not be an option for a lot of women. So I do understand that. But I think things that absolutely need to be discussed are finances. कि कितने पैसे हैं, कौन contribute करेगा, क्या expectations हैं. And obviously that changes. मैं ये नहीं कह रही कि कोई भी boundary या कोई भी चीज़ unchangeable होती है पूरी ज़िंदगी के लिए. But I think, again, I feel like we're both speaking from a place of a woman. So it's important for women to know what they're signing up for. And for men to know also kya responsibility they're taking on, if that's what it is. And I think a lot of things that are important are कि आपके shared goals similar हों, आपकी, you have something that brings you together, so a common interest or something, but also very important to have your spaces outside of that.
Yeah.
So when you're being introduced to somebody or when you're speaking to them, I think, imagine that you're 5 years down the line from this, and what does your life then look like? आपके goals क्या, आपने पढ़ना है, आपने नहीं पढ़ना, आपने बाहर जाना है, आपने नहीं जाना, आपने housewife बनना है, right? So how does this person feel about that? I think it's very important and for that requires knowing what you want out of life. Because
so you need to I was recently invited as a guest in a podcast, and they asked me this question, and I said, you can't ask the right questions if you don't even know yourself.
Yes.
Because then what will you ask?
Yes.
And what difference does the answer make?
Yeah. And also the reality of this is a question answer session is not going to guarantee anything.
It's not,
unfortunately, right? It might help you gauge where this person positions themselves politically, morally, whatever. But no, let's be real, nobody's being themselves in an arranged, situation. Which is where sort of my slightly more controversial idea comes in. I think it's very important to be in relationships.
Right.
You only get to know yourself through relationship.
And what you want.
Yeah, and what you don't want, more
what you want, what you don't want, what you are ready to bring to the table, and what you want the other person to bring to the table.
Yes.
वरना आपको पता ही नहीं चलेगा.
And a lot of like soft skills of how to communicate, what to expect, like वो चीज़ें relationship में develop होती हैं. I do find that people who've never been in a relationship of whatever sort, till the point they get married, they feel very out of their depth when they do, because they just don't know how to be in an intimate relationship. And that's difficult. So let's talk a bit about attachment styles then. Can you tell us attachment styles होते क्या हैं for anybody who doesn't know? एक तो I think एक word जो होता है ना, every year it takes social media
it's
by
like
storm.
the buzzword.
पिछले साल narcissism था. इस साल I think ये attachment है या emotional dysregulation है. उससे पिछले साल climate anxiety थी. So all of those things exist. I think they enter pop psychology and social media, and they kind of become very central to conversations. What I do want to say about attachment styles is there is no pathological way of attaching. Just because you're avoidant or insecure or anxiously attached, उसमें कोई खराबी नहीं है. It's just kind of saying that this is where I am, right? It's also not a clear and organized box that you fall into and you will never move out of. There is only one pathological style of attachment, which is called disorganized attachment.
अच्छा.
उसमें ये होता है कि attachment is, of course, and you will obviously know this, very deeply related to the caregiving you've received. Right?
Yeah, I want to talk about that as well.
Yeah. So unfortunately, some of our earliest relationships form the template for how we exist in relationships.
And the earliest relationship probably कि आपके माँ बाप के साथ आपकी क्या relationship थी, and that is going to form the basis of all your future relationships.
Yes. Primary caregiving जो आपकी पहले 3 साल जो होती है.
पहले 3 साल.
Even before language develops, like that, those are even more pivotal times. So वो उसमें कोई गलत तरीका नहीं है अटैच होने का. So please don't get caught up in अच्छा I'm anxiously attached or avoidantly attached or whatever. और attachment 2 लोगों के बीच में होती है. अगर आप anxiously attached हैं और दूसरा बंदा avoidant है, sometimes that works out really well.
Can you explain those?
So okay, say there's a conflict, right? And your natural response to that is wanting to fix it immediately. You want to be like, मुझे बताओ कि क्या हुआ, and my response to that is shutting down and avoiding it, right? So that might work very naturally well for us, because you will continuously pester me and I will be avoidant, but what your pestering will do is bring me back into the conversation, right? So sometimes that works out.
By the way, that's me and my husband.
I think that's most couples that I work with.
I'm just like
complimentary.
Oh, I know this. Yeah. Oh, okay, chalo, that's good.
It's not pathological by any means.
Okay.
It's just the template that we have.
Okay.
So 2 anxious people together might not be a great idea. Both people are very anxious about it. But there are some complementary or transactions. Again, I think
it's not set in stone, none of it.
No. And I think that different relationships may vary करता है. जो aim होता है relationship का, and again I'm talking about an intimate relationship, but friendships also, and mother-child relationships. I say mother because that is usually the primary caregiver, but obviously whoever the primary caregiver is. इसके आपने सिक्योरिटी इस्टेब्लिश करनी है रिलेशनशिप में, राइट? और वो ओवरनाइट नहीं होती. ये नहीं होता कि दो सिक्योरली अटैच्ड इंडिविजुअल्स कम टुगेदर एंड दे फॉर्म अ सिक्योरली अटैच्ड रिलेशनशिप.
It takes some time and work.
It takes a lot of time and work. It takes on average 7 years in a marriage to get to a point where you can sense security. So that's usually the point after which you're like, हाँ ठीक है, अब तसल्ली है. And so and trust and safety are based on repeated interactions. So consistency, हर दफ़ा आप conflict करके आप वापस आ रहे हैं, फिर एक pattern follow होता है. So वो establish करनी पड़ती है. It's not something you're born with and gifted with, and then you just end up in a relationship with it.
So you said कि आपके जो बड़े होके आपके जो relationships का attachment style है वो आपकी primary caregiving पे matter करता है. So what do you mean by that? कि बच्चों को, because I'm asking you this because A, I'm a parent.
Of course, yeah.
B, so a lot of the times हमें ना आगे पीछे सुनने को मिलता है कि like you don't have to be, जिस तरह मेरा अगर मैं बताऊँ कि parenting style with my child is कि it's very like I'm always there if he needs me every single time. जिस तरह आप इसको एक एग्जांपल के तौर पे ले लो कि स्लीप ट्रेनिंग होती है. स्लीप ट्रेनिंग में वो कहते हैं कि यू लेट द बेबी बी एंड इवन इफ ही क्राइज एंड देन ही लर्न कि उसने खुद से सोना है और वो इवेंचुअली खुद सो जाएगा और फिर उसको वो चीज़ समझ आ जाएगी और फिर वो इंडिपेंडेंट स्लीपर बन जाता है. आई डिडंट डू दैट. मेरा उसमें ये था कि मैं उसको सिखा दूँगी इंडिपेंडेंट स्लीपिंग जब वो मेरी बात समझ सके. सो ही कैन अंडरस्टैंड व्हाट आई एम सेइंग टू हिम कि लिसन, आई एम हियर, आई एम आउटसाइड, बट यू हैव टू लर्न टू स्लीप ऑन योर ओन, बट आई एम हियर. बट जब बच्चा बहुत छोटा होता है तो आप उसको समझा नहीं सकते चीज़. तो आप उसको छोड़ के जा रहे हो अगर कमरे में और वो रो रहा है तो उसको तो ऐसे फील होगा, अबैंडन्ड फील हो जाएगा. उसको आप समझा नहीं सकते कि आई एम ट्राइंग टू टीच यू टू स्लीप ऑन योर ओन. सो श्योर like वो सीख जाएगा in some way, but so for me it was just like I have to be there, but then people say no, you're spoiling your child, let them be independent, let them learn. So this is just an example. I don't know how much this conversation actually like
it does.
connects with that.
It connects with a lot of different areas of it actually. एक तो पहली बात ये, you don't need to be a perfect parent, right? You just need to be a good enough one. Parents have their own lives. हर बच्चे को different parenting मिलती है depending on where their parents are at that point in their life, right? Where they are emotionally, physically, financially, all of those things matter. The thing is, the only thing that's important for your child is for them to know that there is consistency.
Right, okay.
You will disappoint your child. In fact, it's really important to disappoint your child.
Right.
Because the sooner they learn that life is going to disappoint them, the easier relationships are. Vanna wo, it's very easy to get caught up in this thing of perfection, of expecting partners to be perfect, expecting people that are in relationship to never let them down. And imagine being a partner to somebody like that who's just like, who can never be disappointed.
Yeah.
That sounds really difficult.
Yeah.
So you have to let them down. It's actually very important to let them down. But as a mother, you have that instinct of recognizing कि अच्छा बस अब ज़्यादा हो गया.
अब ज़्यादा हो गया, हाँ.
And that's something you are that's built in. And it's okay. I think अभी ये भी एक, even though attachment का वो कहते हैं कि उन्होंने दुनिया के हर कोने में उन्होंने replicate किया और वो consistent ही रहते हैं results. Like African tribes में भी वही होते हैं कि anxious avoidant बच्चे ये होते हैं. और by the way, 60% of children are securely attached. That's where 60% of us fall in the securely attached kind of category. So, लेकिन these are also very Eurocentric conversations, right? कि आप sleep training.
Yeah.
अब वो conversation वापस आ रही है कि co-sleeping is the way to go.
Yeah. वापस आ रही है.
And that's something even in the West till the 1800s, everybody was co-sleeping. Nobody had the luxury of having a nursery or things like that.
Yeah.
So the main thing is for parents to establish a sense of safety, a sense of reliability, and a sense of consistency for their child. And that's it. You will let them down. Life will let them down. Adversity happens. You will never be a perfect parent, and that's okay. And that's sort of the energy I like to carry into my sessions, because I do think that therapy can become a very parent-blamey space. कि ओ मेरे माँ बाप ने ये नहीं किया इसलिए ये, एंड और वो उसकी स्पेस भी होती है एब्सोल्युटली. आई थिंक कि वो प्रोसेस करना ज़रूरी होता है, द एंगर, द रिजेंटमेंट, द व्हाटएवर. But a very big developmental milestone in therapy is often when you can see your parents as human, who are capable of making
those mistakes. Yeah, 100%. That is so valid. Kyunki there is no formula.
No.
For parenting.
No. You learn on the job.
You learn on the job. And like you can do everything and then it can still be a complete disaster according to you. और we कहते हैं ना कि आप ज़्यादा स्ट्रिक्ट भी नहीं होते, ऐसा हो सकते हैं, आप ज़्यादा लीनियंट भी नहीं हो सकते, और लेकिन some parents think no, being strict is the way to like be. So वो मतलब I don't, at the end of the day every parent has a, you know, मतलब किसी की इंटेंशन बुरी तो नहीं होती अपने बच्चों के साथ, कुछ भी हो सकता है,
बट वेल इंटेंशन हार्म भी एक बहुत रियल चीज़ है. लेकिन मैं ये कहूँगी कि none of this is set in stone, right? Relationships can be repaired, things can be worked with. Adulthood में भी लोगों की अपने पेरेंट्स के साथ relationships बदलती हैं, चेंज होती हैं, रिजॉल्व होती हैं. So इतना I mean, I'm not a parent, so I suppose it's easier for me to say this, but don't get too caught up in that. Trust that you will figure your way out, and that your son will figure his way out also.
So मैं अपनी बात और करूँगी. Like I feel like I'm not looking for you to tell me if this is right or wrong. I'm putting it out there for everyone. Just I personally believe that, you know, obviously too much dependency is not good, and like you said, disappointment is like important for growth. It's so important. The real world is out there, is full of disappointments. You can't raise your child in a super sheltered, protected environment where everything is like, you know, rainbows and butterflies and roses. They have to experience some things. And we'll go back to like the sleep training thing. I think it's important. जिसमें कहते हैं कि आपने independence सिखानी, इसका ये मतलब नहीं है कि you throw them to figure it out on their own. Just sleep training, cry it out methods में होता है. Like मुझे इस तरह लगता है, if you want to teach them independence, you tell them, you let them experience stuff. But when something happens, they should just have this security that their parents will be there. That is the most important thing.
Because it very quickly can turn and feel like, I'm not so sure that that's necessarily what's happening, but neglect, and that is abuse. That's a form of
abuse. Yeah.
ज़रूरी नहीं कि आप पकड़ के डंडियों से मार दें बच्चे को, तो तभी वो abuse है. Neglect is also a form of abuse.
I just feel like being there for your child doesn't mean micromanaging and taking every decision for them. कि यूँ करो, इससे तुम्हारी life ठीक होगी, and helping them. Like there's a certain point where you have to like not help them and help them do it on their own. But if something bad happens and they need you, then you have to be there.
And that's something you have to constant, like over the course of their life, reassure them that you're there. It's not कि आपने पहले साल कर दी, दूसरे साल कर दी. You have to teach them again and again.
Consistency, like you said.
That this is okay. Yeah, you fucked up. That's fine. We'll figure it out.
Yeah. But you have to let them fuck up. That's also important.
I don't know if I said this last time or not, but one of the ways that I often, you know, make sense of how लोगों के अंदर उनका जो internal critical parent होता है वो कैसे structured होता है, इसके आप जब घर में ग्लास तोड़ते हैं तो क्या पेरेंट्स का रिस्पॉन्स होता है. कुछ पेरेंट्स का होता है कि क्या कर दिया, like how could you, like what a stupid
make a big deal out of it.
Big deal out of it. And other parents are just like टूटने वाली चीज़ थी, टूट गई. And I think that's such a like interesting way to capture what happens when you make a mistake in your family.
What's the right way? Because I'm the other one. I'm just like, oh, टूट गया.
I think गलती हो जाती है, हज़ारों गलतियाँ होंगी, right? And I think it's very important to have failure and to work through it instead of letting it be this big daunting thing, and you know that you can never
get past or forgive yourself for. I think वो कहते हैं ना कि आपका जो बड़े होकर आपका जो इंटरनल मोनोलॉग होता है वो भी आपकी पेरेंट्स ने जो आपको चीज़ें कही होती हैं, लाइक, एंड दैट इज़ हाउ यू सॉर्ट ऑफ लाइक, इफ़ योर पेरेंट्स बचपन से देर मेकिंग अ वेरी बिग डील आउट ऑफ एवरीथिंग and every mistake that you make, you become very unforgiving of yourself.
Yes. Yeah.
कि आप फिर you really beat yourself up over everything, and again that damages your self esteem so much. तो और अच्छा primary caregiving में और ऐसी कौन सी चीज़ें आती हैं that will develop those attachment
so very
styles?
early on, it's even things as small as eye contact, maintaining eye contact with the baby, responding to their facial, their cues and all of those things. Obviously, mothering is not something I have lived experience in, and I have not done a lot of work. But the quality of what I do know is the quality of early relationships does impact that that we have in the future.
Right.
And khali, और ये भी I think important है कि there was a question about, I don't remember what it was, but something about parents who are immature or something, and there are different types of parents जो ज़रूरी नहीं कि पहले 3 साल में, but आगे भी जाके उनकी emotional age शायद कुछ और हो from their chronological age. और अक्सर होता है कि they're stuck at a developmental stage. All of us have the potential to do that. But parents who जो parentified children होते हैं, I don't know if you've heard that term.
No, क्या होता है वो?
It's when children in the house kind of take on the responsibility of parenting. So ये एक over responsibility वाली चीज़ भी, because माँ बाप की responsibility है बच्चे को parent करना, right? Like कपड़े बनाना, shoelaces सिखाना. You don't throw them in there and kind of tell them to parent themselves. That's also very, very destructive for children. So
but वही बात है कि बहुत सारी जगहों पे in the name of independence वो चीज़ कराई जाती है, spoil नहीं करना, independent करना है.
बच्चे तो बच्चे रहने दें,
बच्चे को बच्चे रहने दें, आहिस्ता चीज़ें सिखाएं, सीख लेंगे. हाँ, that's true, that's important. Okay, so therapy के बारे में ज़रा बात करते हैं. कुछ लोगों को इस तरह लगता है कि जब आप थेरेपी में जाते हो तो बेसिकली आप जाके बस वेंट करते हो, और जो आपका थेरेपिस्ट है वो आपको कहता है इट्स ओके, आपके साथ बुरा हुआ, लाइक ज़्यादती हुई. एंड आई फील लाइक अ लॉट ऑफ पीपल फील लाइक वो थेरेपिस्ट के पास, स्पेशली बहुत सारे लोग दूसरों को नहीं जाने देते बिकॉज देर जस्ट लाइक कि वो विक्टिम मेंटालिटी जो है ना वो ज़्यादा रीइंफोर्स हो जाएगी कि सारी ज़्यादतियाँ तो तुम्हारे साथ ही हुई, तुम्हारे हस्बैंड ने बुरा किया, तुम्हारे माँ बाप ने तुम्हें गलत रेज़ किया और तुम्हारे साथ अब्यूज़ हुई. तो इज़ दैट ट्रू?
So I can't speak for all types of therapies and all therapists, but I take issue with that idea generally because I think if therapy is a space for just venting and just validation, then the work is not happening. राइट अगर आपने बात नहीं करनी है किसी से और यही सुनना है
इसके लिए तो फ्रेंड्स होते हैं आपके पास.
हाँ, और या फिर आप अपने आप से बातें कर लें, राइट. सो दैट्स नॉट टू से कि उसकी ज़रूरत नहीं होती, बिकॉज बहुत सारे लोग ऐसे एक्सपीरियंसेस के साथ आ रहे होते हैं जो कहीं और शायद वैलिडेट हो भी नहीं सकते. नोबडी एल्स कैन बी लाइक या दैट्स अ रियली शिटी थिंग दैट हैपेंड टू यू. So absolutely there is room for therapy to be a venting space, for it to be a space where you seek validation. But I do think that a bigger part and perhaps the most significant part of therapy is taking responsibility and accountability for your role in relationships, which is where kind of a relational way of working I find very useful. So if a client is repeatedly coming in late, I'll be like, what's happening? Are you doing this enough? Because basically the basic premise is कि जो therapy room में हो रहा है वो एक microcosm है जो आपकी बाकी relationships में होता है. तो the way that I might be feeling or the way that the client is relating to me is usually what they're doing in their relationships outside. So if I'm sitting there constantly, feeling like I have to do all the work to bring them into the room, other people in relationship with them are probably feeling something similar, right? So, and then I'll find a way to bring that in and discuss, is this a possibility? But with younger clients and kind of, hamari age ke clients, not that we fall in the younger category anymore. But what I do find is really helpful is that sometimes to be like, I don't know if you know the Reddit thread, am I the asshole?
No.
Okay, so it's like this Reddit thread जिसमें लोग चीज़ें पोस्ट करते हैं और लोगों से पूछते हैं am I the asshole कि ये सिचुएशन है, अब आप बताएं कि कसूर मेरा है कि किसी और का. And I think it's a really important question to ask ourselves sometimes कि am I the asshole in this situation? And it's okay if you are. What do you do with that information? It's not a place where you will be reprimanded for it. But that's where change happens.
Interesting. So basically, therapy it's extremely important to call out your clients in where they're the toxic one, or they're the abusers, or they're the one. And I think that is so important because आप victims को तो fix करते रहोगे, but who needs the real therapy?
And if you're not going to be the one to bring it to their attention, then who is?
Will, yeah.
And also, it doesn't need to be a thing of, oh, you're the toxic one or you're abusive, like, how dare you? It's a lot of the times it's outside of people's awareness.
Yeah,
right?
you're working on it. And you're making them identify कि अच्छा कहाँ क्या मसले हैं.
And suddenly they'd be like, oh, अच्छा, this is the role I am playing in this.
You help them reflect on
Yes.
that. हाँ.
And it can be done with a lot of gentleness and empathy. It doesn't need to be a...
Questioning के साथ हो सकता है, gentleness के साथ हो सकता है. हाँ, that makes sense. Yeah, I think that is really important. We don't just need the victims to feel better, but we need people who are toxic and abusive to get fixed so we have less of those people. and most of the time...
the reality hamna is that people who are necessarily the abusers are unlikely to end up in therapy, right? Like,
that's
जो
true.
लोग therapy में आते हैं वो अपने आप को बदलना चाहते हैं, वो अपने आप के बारे में सीखना चाहते हैं. अगर कोई बहुत comfortable है अपने abuse में या अपने use of power में in a way that's abusive, तो वो they're not going to be in your room.
Yeah, they're not going to be in your room. That's true. But I do think that sometimes, आपको लगता है कि आप बेचारे हो, but actually you're not.
Yes.
And you're going to therapy because you're thinking that you're the, बेचारा in this situation, and then you can eventually figure out, okay, I need to fix some shit as well, and then makes sense. अच्छा, ये एक चीज़ हो गई. And I want to ask you, because now it's a thing, पहले तो therapy दूर तक नहीं होता था. Now it's becoming thing कि सबको therapy की ज़रूरत होती है. Is that true?
So मैं कल ही एक statistic पढ़ी थी कि lifespan studies, that follow people across their lifespan, have seen that 80% of people will at some point be above the threshold for a clinical diagnosis in their life, right? At some point in their life, 80%. This is again not Pakistani data. But and you can take issue with the whole clinical approach to that and pathologizing all of that, but 80% of people will at some point, according to that study, need to be in therapy. You can need therapy, but it doesn't mean it's going to work, because there are lots of other factors that play into that. Aapki readiness, aapki relationship, aapki with the therapist, aapki willingness to change, आपकी ability to even show up. Like आपके 6 बच्चे हैं और आपको help चाहिए लेकिन आप नहीं आ सकते, तो that therapy is not going to work.
Right.
So there are a bunch of factors. वो usually आप initial assessment में therapists, at least I do, I assess with them कि can you commit to this? It's a monetary commitment, it's an emotional commitment, it's a commitment of time, and yeah. When there's a level of stability in place, then you're able to undertake that.
Able to undertake that, yeah. But do you think that everybody should?
I don't think if there's a right or wrong answer. I think lots of people may benefit from therapy, but there are lots of ways of healing. I'm not going to say that therapy is the only way. Yeah, no. People find healing in all sorts of places.
Right. But there are other ways to unpack, other ways to heal as well. Yeah. Whatever works. Or वही बात है, like you said, therapy may not work for some people. Another thing is कि how do you know? How do you choose the right therapist for yourself? ज़्यादातर लोगों का होता है, oh, I'm seeing a therapist. So आपकी friend देख रही है तो कह रही है बड़ी अच्छी therapist है, तो तुम भी कर लो, try कर लो, तो उसी के साथ appointment ले लेगी. So do you just go see any therapist, या कोई तरीका है to find the right therapist for yourself? क्योंकि हर किसी ने आपके थेरेपिस्ट की भी डिफरेंट क्वालिफिकेशंस होती हैं, आपके अलग मसले होते हैं. आपका ऐसा हो सकता है कि आपका किसी तरह का भी पास्ट ट्रॉमा हो सकता है. सो हाउ डू यू नो दैट दिस इज़ द ट्रॉमा दैट दिस थेरेपिस्ट कैन हेल्प मी हील?
So first of all, if somebody is saying to you, I've really benefited from seeing a particular therapist, ask them what about that has been helpful for you.
ठीक है.
And sometimes even that will be like, अच्छा, if they're saying कि वो बहुत directive है या मुझे बताते हैं या बताती हैं कि क्या करना है, that might be helpful for them. It may not be what you're looking for, or it may be exactly what you're looking for, right? So that is the first assessment. Dusra, I don't think it's possible to know till you're actually in therapy. I do think the responsibility of that lies on the therapist. The other big problem here is, of course, the limited number of therapists, right?
Yeah.
So aapke paas, you don't have a lot of choice. It's not like you can visit 6 and then be like, okay, this one feels like a good fit. Here, most people will wait 3 to 4 months on a waiting list and be like, thankfully, ab mujhe jagah mil gayi hai. So I have become a lot more selective in the people that I take on, because I do think it's important for people to manage their expectations of therapy and of the therapist. So और मैं बहुत एक्सप्लिसिटली बताती हूँ कि इस चीज़ के साथ मैं आपको हेल्प कर सकती हूँ और इस चीज़ के साथ मैं नहीं कर सकती, या ये चीज़ मेरी कॉम्पिटेंस के बाहर है.
Yes, that. So basically, जैसा अब मैंने किसी का पढ़ा कि थेरेपिस्ट की प्रोफाइल थी, उसके ऊपर लिखा हुआ था कपल्स थेरेपी के बारे में बात हुई थी, फिर शायद आई डोंट नो, बट मैं एक एग्जांपल दे देती हूँ कि अच्छा कपल्स थेरेपी की बात हुई है, साथ ही मे बी एडिक्शन की बात हुई है कि हेल्प्स यू विद एडिक्शन, ये वो, एंड दैट्स not what you need, but somebody else said this is really good therapist. So can you go to any therapist for any issue? Like would you just go to that therapist even though you don't need couples therapy or need to get over addiction, but you generally feel like you need to see a good therapist and your friend says that's a great therapist? So should you just like go for it?
Have set up an initial consultation if you can, but go in with your goals. What do you want out of therapy?
Okay, right?
So a good exercise to visualize that is कि आप imagine करें कि therapy ख़त्म हो गई है and you're walking out of that. I mean, this is something I use with clients. What will need to change for you to know कि therapy हो गई है, right? What will change in your life? What will change within you for you? And then you work backwards from that. Can you help me with that?
Okay. Yeah.
I will also say there are some things that are specialist areas. Addiction, for example, is a specialized area. I don't think anybody in Pakistan is qualified to fully work with that.
Okay.
So this time मैं addiction के clients नहीं लेती. Couples, again, is something that you need additional training for. Working with children, you need additional training for.
Yeah.
I would say just be wary of somebody who advertises themselves as being able to do everything. They probably are not doing a very good job at any of those things.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and meet them and ask them, अच्छा, how can you help me? It's an interview. It's, you know, it's assessing कि आपको क्या चाहिए और दूसरा बंदा क्या काम कर.
So you work with the therapist then. If you're looking for a therapist, you go to the therapist. You ask them questions as well. Can you, like, these are my issues and do you think you can?
Yeah, and how will you help me? So what does working with you look like? How long am I committing to this
right.
for? Just that the kind of therapy that I offer, it's not a fit for everybody. Some people just want a very directive kind of CBT type of therapy, that because they feel like that's what will be helpful and valuable for them. And they do that.
You don't do CBT. Kyun?
I'm not trained to do it.
Okay. And what is CBT exactly? Cognitive behavioral therapy. What does that mean?
Again, since I'm not trained in it, I don't know very much about it. But it's
you're a therapist, so you know more than us about it.
It's a very structured, manualized therapy. It's advertised as a great fit for depression because it's a manualized therapy. उसको बहुत ज़्यादा replicate मतलब research करना उस पे आसान होती है जब कोई चीज़ manualized हो. So it's become the gold standard, which I'm quite wary of calling it that. But it's helpful for some people. Okay. It sort of helps you deconstruct faulty thoughts and cognitions and behaviors. And there's some things that I find quite useful about it, like there's this thing called question the evidence, right? Okay. So अगर आपको paranoia है या आपको कोई चीज़ है या आपको डर लग रहा है तो you ask the client कि अच्छा evidence किधर है इस चीज़ की. And those things can be really helpful.
So basically it's a very structured form of therapy.
And it's a very short-term therapy.
Okay.
And some people might be looking for exactly that.
For exactly that, right. So we'll get back to some of the questions that we got. एक सवाल आया था, बहुत interesting लगा था, and I think a lot of people can relate to it. It's how to sort of deal with the fear of change, you know, when people are stepping into a new new phase of their life. So that comes with fear because I think it's like you don't know what's going to happen. So how does one deal with that? What would you say about that?
So life transitions in itself is a whole other area of psychotherapy. There are therapists who specialize in dealing with life transitions. So whether you're transitioning from a family to a different, मतलब आपकी शादी हो रही है, आपका बच्चा हो रहा है, that's a life transition. आप job change करें, आप career switch करें, आप relocate करें, all of those are transitions, right? And they will bring up different things for different people. Different people will have different relationships with endings and with beginnings. But you're right, fear is one of the more common ones, anxiety, uncertainty, because ट्रांजिशन में यही होता है ना कि ओवरआर्चिंग चीज़ ये होती है कि अनसर्टेनिटी है या अननोन है बहुत सारा, एंड दैट कैन बी वेरी destabilizing for people. But I also think it's where a lot of growth happens.
Right.
It's, you know, it's in that really uncomfortable window of uncertainty that we're like, oh, actually I'm really good at this, or I didn't even realize I would be good at this. And if you're not making those transitions, if you're not going through them, वो एक stagnation or stuckness वाली जो चीज़ है,
you're not growing if you're not going through these changes.
Yeah.
So do you think that there are some people who find it more difficult to deal with change and others find it easier, and if yes, then why do you think so?
Again, our historical relationships with it, right? Like for example, what has life change in the past meant for you? Has it come with a lot of uncertainty? Has it been life adversity जिसकी वजह से आपकी change हुई ज़िंदगी? You know, like for you, for example, with people in an army background, I always say this कि वो 2-year age जो होती है ना कि हर 2 साल बाद आपको पता है कि आपने move करना है, वो transition आ रही है, and that's very methodical and planned out. So for a lot of people, for army kids, there's a lot of excitement attached to that transition.
Yes.
It's not necessarily because वो बाकी चीज़ें in place होती है ना, सामान भी पहुंच जाएगा, घर भी होगा, school for the most part वही रहेगा, अक्सर आपको दोस्त भी मिल जाते हैं उस जगह पे अपने पुराने. So yeah, your personal relationship with change.
हाँ, I agree, because और मेरा तो ये point हो गया था that I get really bored, like why aren't things like changing? Like why am I just sort of like stuck here? What's next? That's I sort of like, you know, even though I don't know कि मतलब unknown तो मेरे लिए भी होता है, but मेरे लिए होता है कि okay,
वो एक exciting चीज़ है ना,
it's exciting, हाँ, वो because I start to feel like I'm stuck in a rut, when a lot of people are very happy in a comfortable place.
Yeah, people will be in their 50s and living in their parents' house.
Yeah.
And because that's as far as they would want to venture out.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's missing out on life, and that's not living it to the fullest. There was another very interesting question about death anxiety.
Acha.
हाँ, कि how to kind of...
Oh my God, yeah.
And again, this is not my area of work. Existential psychotherapy होती है. But some of the big kind of figures in this area do say कि जिन लोगों को ज़्यादा anxiety होती है वो वही होते हैं जो, because death आनी है, right? It's going to happen.
Death is the only certainty.
Yeah. And
yes.
It can happen anytime. It can happen in any way. But it's also the thing that propels us to live our life to the fullest. It's that awareness of the ending that forces us to be alive, right? So our alive, अगर हमने पूरी हमेशा जिंदा रहना होता in, you know, forever, we wouldn't be motivated to do anything. So the death is a motivator in lots of ways. और जिन लोगों को ज़्यादा death anxiety होती है, वो अक्सर उन लोगों को हो रही होती है who have not lived their life, you know, they haven't done anything meaningful with it, or feel like they haven't done anything meaningful with it. A wasted life in some ways. Not that that's, you know, वो होता है, but death anxiety का एक ये भी तरीका
ये element है कि इस वजह से होती है.
The more alive you have felt, the less intimidating death is.
Or I think another very depressing aspect would be is that, of course, death is not intimidating if you don't want to live.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Just I had somebody on the podcast come in and she said to me that a lot of people have seen it, so some people know what I'm talking about. She said that she was in an accident, and in that accident the car spun like 3 times, and when the first like and when that was happening, it was like, you know, her whole life was like in front of her, and when that was happening and she thought she was going to die, she was okay with it because she was in such an unhappy place. Like she said कि पहला spin हुआ तो मुझे realization हुई, oh my God, I'm about to die. जब दूसरा spin हुआ तो she was like, okay, and that's fine, like I'm like ready to die at the moment, which is so sad. Basically she was sharing कि वो कितनी difficult place में थी, and then when the third spin happened, she realized how it's going to hurt her mom, and then suddenly she didn't want to die. So वो मतलब so it's just I'm just sharing that कि I guess if you've lived enough and if you were not living at all, then then you feel like maybe.
And I think the thing that stands out for me in the story that you're telling is hopelessness. That is connected, of course, to how we feel about death, how hopeful we are about our life, how able to change it do we feel.
True.
जब stuckness बहुत ज़्यादा होती है, और depression में अक्सर ये होता है कि it's and what I have found is that people are not looking to die. They're not looking to, like, death is not what they're looking forward to. It feels like an ending to the misery in some way.
Yeah.
Which feels like two different things.
It is two different things, I guess.
Yeah, again, it's that relationship with end can be something that's very that's actually movement from the stuckness of this life in some ways.
क्या अच्छा ये तो खत्म हो भाई. हाँ, because यहाँ पे तो there's hope. Oh, that's sad. Okay. Okay, I also want to ask you, how does one know that they need therapy now?
Okay, so that's a really good question. I think कुछ चीज़ें होती हैं जैसे आपकी I'll go over the main kind of markers that are popular. पहली चीज़ होती है आपकी functionality. आपको लग रहा है कि इम्पैक्ट हो रही है, जो आप काम पहले कर सकते थे या कर सकती थी वो नहीं आप कर पा रहे. सो गेटिंग अप फॉर वर्क और स्कूल और कॉलेज, गेटिंग टास्क्स डन ऑन टाइम, ड्राइविंग योरसेल्फ समवेयर, लीविंग द हाउस, लाइक जब उस तरह की चीज़ पैरानोया होता है या फोबियाज होते हैं. तो things that were doable suddenly feel not doable, right? So that would be one of the things to attend to. Then अक्सर ये होता है कि people feel very overwhelmed or scared by the intensity of their emotion. So या बहुत sadness feel कर रहे हैं या बहुत ज़्यादा anxiety हो रही है, and that's feeling scary, that's feeling unmanageable, that's feeling overwhelming. That's another clue. Dissociation, I don't know if you're familiar with the term.
क्या मतलब है?
So dissociation ये होता है, it's a protective mechanism, and जिस आप बैठे बैठे आप स्पेक्ट्रम पे एग्जिस्ट करती है, लाइक ऑल थिंग्स. A very small example of it would be कि आप बैठे हुए हैं आप किसी मीटिंग में whatever, and then you zone out, right? Like you dissociate from the physical space. If you feel like it's very hard to stay in the present and the here and now, that's also a sign कि कोई आप पे चीख रहा है. Like for example, in abusive households, this starts to happen a lot कि the way that you protect yourself is by shutting it out. Right? Yeah. So numbness is a feeling also. Dissociation is a very good indicator of where you are. The more able to be in the present you are, the healthier emotionally you are.
हाँ, इसलिए कहते हैं mindfulness बड़ी अच्छी होती है आपकी mental health के लिए.
That helps lots of people. But I also want to say कि mental health is not a thing. It's not something you arrive at and stay at, and then it's not a binary. या मैं mentally healthy हूँ या मैं unhealthy हूँ. वो across our life, across different areas of it, wax and wane करती है, ebb and flow करती है. It's something that you move in and out of. It's not a position that you can
achieve.
Yeah,
you can't be like, okay, now
मैंने 6 sessions करनी, अब I'm done.
Nirvana. There is no such thing. No. Because it's going to always be like wherever you are in life or what you've experienced or what happened or just anything.
And adversity will come. Right, it will come whether you want it or not. It will come in unexpected ways, and it will be disorienting.
Right.
Yeah. And that's part of the human existence.
Okay, interesting. So when you are unable to function, like do your daily tasks that you were able to do before, if you're feeling overwhelmed with certain emotions or thoughts, and if you are like sort of zoning out or
and then there are other things, like if you feel like अच्छा आपको आपकी ज़िंदगी में कुछ हुआ, and now you feel like there's sufficient distance from it for you to be like, I want to process what happened. Sometimes that's what brings people into therapy. I always ask, what made you pick up the phone and get in touch, because usually something will have happened. Sometimes लोग in the midst of crisis भी होते हैं, जब वो आते हैं कि अच्छा मेरी divorce होने लगी है, या I've just found out I'm pregnant and I don't want to be, or there will be sometimes that people do that.
Sometimes a very clear trigger of an event.
Yes, and that's or they've had a bereavement and they want to come in. Sometimes it'll be that. Other times it'll be things like I want to know myself better, I want to explore my relationships, I want to grow, I want to change. So these are all of the things that people themselves kind of refer themselves into therapy for. there are other things that we may not be aware of, other types of pathologies that will require psychiatric often help. So दो चीज़ें that come to mind are manic episodes जो bipolar disorder में होती हैं, और एक्टिव साइकोटिक एपिसोड्स जिसमें आपका रियलिटी से ब्रेक होता है. सो वो आपके इर्द गिर्द ही कोई आपको बता सकता है कि यू नो दिस इज मेनिया, लाइक दिस, you're not being yourself, you're walking around the room all the time, you're not sleeping at night, you're just constantly buzzed, constantly वो. So then आपके इर्द गिर्द किसी को
आइडेंटिफाई करते हैं दिस पर्सन नीड्स हेल्प,
या कोई ऐसी कोई जो मतलब जब लोग एक साइकोटिक एपिसोड में होते हैं, अगर पैरानॉइड किस्म की थॉट्स हैं कि somebody is out to get me और people are coming to kill me, वो उस वक्त इंसान को तो बहुत रियल लग रही होती हैं. सो इट्स अनलाइकली दैट दे आर गोइंग टू बी लाइक oh something's wrong and I need to see a therapist, but people around them might be able to be like okay this feels like a disconnect from reality. So then people around you would be the ones making a referral, and the place to go to at that point would be a psychiatrist. And of course there's suicidality, that's another one that brings people in.
Oh yeah, when people start having those thoughts.
Yeah.
Do you think mostly like when people have suicidal thoughts, do you think it can happen randomly?
Sometimes.
Okay.
But again, suicidality का भी spectrum होता है ना. There's the desire to die might be very different from actively saying कि tonight I'm going to take my life this way, right? So between those things there's a whole spectrum. It might be like it would be great if a bus hit me, or it would be great if I just dropped dead.
Right.
That might be one part of it.
That's wanting to die but not necessarily killing yourself.
Yeah.
अच्छा.
So वो depression में होता है, of course, और reasons होते हैं. Chronic illnesses के साथ बहुत होता है, जो long term illnesses जिनके साथ लोग रह रहे होते हैं. It impacts the quality of life significantly. But I do think that people who are experiencing suicidal thoughts or ideas or plans, when they come into therapy, that's them saying we want to live. It's it's more alarming when a suicidal client doesn't show up. Then I panic and then I'm like, oh shit, what's happening?
Oh yeah, okay.
But when they're showing up, when they're talking about it, वो suicidality managed रहती है.
Because they're having those thoughts, but they're also scared of those thoughts.
Yeah,
they're not
they're
like
disturbed by them.
They're disturbed by them. Why am I?
Or excited by them. Like both of those things happen.
Okay. So what if like what is that? So postpartum depression में इस तरह होता है कि you can be completely fine, happy, and then you have a child and then it hits you, the depression hits you and you're finding it very hard, and being a mom can be very hard, like sleepless nights and everything that you have to do and giving up everything you had, and then there's these moments of extreme frustration where you just can't like figure it out and you want to sleep but you can't sleep, and it's hell in that moment. So do you think that, because I know so many people and I've experienced this myself as well, in those moments, those were the only moments that you wanted to kill yourself, like actually kill yourself. Is that PPD? Is that, what is that?
So,
or is it that is normal also?
So there's two things, right?
Okay.
एक डिप्रेशन का एलिमेंट जो अब थोड़ा डीकंस्ट्रक्ट होना शुरू हो गया, वो एक फिजियोलॉजिकल वो है कि एक न्यूरोट्रांसमीटर्स का इम्बैलेंस है, राइट? तो वो बट सुइसाइडलिटी में भी दो तरह की होती है. एक इम्पल्सिव होती है और एक होती है जिसमें आप बैठ के आपने प्लान किया और सोच रहे हो. सो द स्केरी बिट इज़ द इम्पल्सिव वन. ओके, बिकॉज थॉट्स आती हैं, लेकिन बट इफ़ यू हैव ए हिस्ट्री ऑफ इम्पल्सिवली डूइंग थिंग्स देन ऑब्वियसली द रिस्क इज़ हायर.
राइट.
If you've historically been somebody who is very impulsive by nature, impulsive spender, buyer, whatever, raat ko nikal gaye, whatever, like somebody who's less likely to think the whole idea through, then that kind of suicidality is a higher risk. I'm not saying ke बहुत कोई वो है, but like, और होती है natural part of it. But also to answer your PPD question, I just wanted to say this first because it linked with the suicide discussion, is ke the way that I make sense of depression, and this is again the kind of training that I've had, it may not be something everybody agrees with, is it's either loss that is unprocessed, or it's anger turned inward. So grief that is not grieved, or anger that's turned inwards, right? And both of those things fit very well with PPD because having a child is a life transition, but it's also a loss. It's a massive loss of the life you had before you were a mother.
Yeah.
Right? It requires you giving up your sleep, your life, your body in so many ways, your intimate relationship often for a period of time. And also you're suddenly with this child who you don't know what to do with, and they're crying and you can't understand them because they're not saying things, and that's a lot of anger, right? That you don't know what to do with it. So again, giving birth is a life transition. You absolutely, for the first time at least, you don't know what you're signing up for. There's no way you could know. Nobody can know, right? And har bachcha bhi different hota hai, har pregnancy bhi different hoti hai. So इसीलिए PPD एक बहुत रियल चीज़ है, और PPD ना भी हो तो बेबी ब्लूज़ बहुत सारे लोग एक्सपीरियंस करते हैं बिकॉज वो लाइफ चेंज है, राइट? एंड you've landed yourself in something that there is no roadmap that necessarily exists for it for you. So yes, it's very common. I think if you're experiencing suicidality with it or suicidal thoughts, immediately see a psychiatrist.
Right.
Talk to your gynecologist. हमारी society में थोड़ा it's kind of seen as a, it's not taken very seriously at all, because it feels like ये तो हर औरत करती है,
तुम्हें क्या हो गया?
हाँ, मतलब this is something that women are designed to do.
Yeah, like ये मैं कह रही थी कि this should be natural for you.
You're wired for this. Why are you having a response to this? And actually PPDs existed long before. It's not the first, Or actually PPD का attachment से बहुत close link है, because if a mother is depressed, again I don't want to bring up mom guilt and there's no shame around PPD. But it does impact the relationship that you have with your child, because you may not be able to be fully present with them at that time. So it's really important to seek help, to find a support, even if you don't have access to a psychiatrist, gynecologist. I imagine most people might. Talk to the gynecologist, but also delegate your responsibilities a little bit. यहाँ पे thankfully
find help and support. Yeah.
It does take a village, unfortunately.
Yes, it does.
Or fortunately, whatever you want to make of it. You may find support in siblings, in your mother-in-law, your mother, your partner. It's interesting how I organize that, in that order. Women first.
The first one should have been the partner.
उसमें बहुत एक interesting चीज़ हुई. I work with a client who's not Pakistani. I've worked with them for many years. And I said something about them taking responsibility of their, it's like you help out with the kid also, and they were like, I need to correct you, and they've never done this to me. We worked together like almost 5 years, and I don't help out with it. It's my responsibility. I brought them into the world, and it's something that I. But to I was like, because वो इतना हमारे अंदर deeply embedded है ये चीज़ कि वो आदमी भी responsibility है नहीं.
और सोचा हमारे अंदर है तो उनमें कितना होगा?
बिल्कुल.
Like that's just messed up, right? Like हमारी expectation ही इतनी low है उस चीज़ के बारे में कि oh my god तुमने थोड़ा सा कर दिया तो wow, you're like exceptional.
Language around it, right? Like मैंने भी कहा कि help.
Help, actually babysit, helping and babysitting. It's like no, like you're parenting,
course,
equal responsibility उस तरह से है. हाँ, but पता है क्या, like I would say कि yes, you didn't mention the partner in the start, and it shouldn't be mentioned because it takes a village beyond the partner. Partner should be an understood thing, and everybody else is a village.
Yeah, but the partner is first and everybody else is secondary.
Yeah, 100%.
Because ये भी तो एक होता है ना कि जैसे लौट के उसने कल काम पे जाना है, उसको लेता कमरे में सोने दो वाला.
I will never understand.
Yeah, don't have children if you want to do that, right? Like I think it's so unfair to women to have to carry the burden of childbearing.
क्योंकि उन्होंने भी सुबह उठ के सोएंगी तो उठेंगी वैसे.
You have feelings about that, Hamna? Do tell us.
उन्होंने भी तो करना होता है ना. Alhamdulillah, like I would say, and this is not to glorify. Okay, oh wow. But I had a lot of support. I found a lot of support in my partner, who I'd have to say had a lot on his plate as well at the time, and he could have easily said to me कि भाई, I actually realize this now कि अच्छा मतलब it was not easy for him as well, but it's like
आदमियों को भी PPD होता है. I don't know if I said or not. Men also experience postpartum depression.
Okay, can you elaborate?
So it's a loss for both parents. Like obviously औरतों के लिए there's that physiological element tied into it, the hormonal shifts, the fluctuation into that. But men also experience PPD.
Okay, and what's their PPD like?
Similar to women's, like frustration. For men, depression often manifests with anger. So वो होता है ज़्यादा.
So वो ज़्यादा उनको I think वो यही होता है कि they're actually having PPD but उस चीज़ की कोई awareness ही नहीं है, तो वो बस गुस्सा हो रहे हैं कि why aren't you managing this or what's going on.
Withdrawal वो भी होता है. So they will withdraw from the situation.
Oh, okay. So I've seen that. I've seen that कि शादी हुई थी, सब कुछ फिट था, बच्चा जब हुआ तो चलो औरत का जो भी एक्सपीरियंस था वो तो था, मदरहुड एंड PPD भी था एंड एवरीथिंग, बट द हस्बैंड रियली स्टार्टेड स्पेंडिंग मोर टाइम विद हिज फ्रेंड्स, मोर टाइम डूइंग अदर थिंग्स, एंड इट वाज जस्ट सो वियर्ड, वेयर जस्ट like I need you more right now, what are you doing, like you did not spend so much time with your friends that you're doing now, but they're actually sort of like withdrawing from that situation.
Men have responses to being fathers also, right? Like, or sometimes they just don't know what to do with it, and it's quite difficult for a lot of them. But also postpartum depression, बच्चा होना, life change, all of those things, it's a massive change in your intimate relationship. आपके partner के साथ आपकी relationship बहुत fundamentally बदल जाती है when there's a baby.
There's a baby.
Two becomes three. Two's a company, three's a crowd.
Yes, true.
So that does.
I think this जो PPD है ये बहुत important है conversation, और हम लोग करते हैं औरतों के लिए, but ये मर्दों के लिए बहुत important है. One of the questions that we got उनमें यही था कि my husband thinks it's not serious, and they need to know that this is a very legit thing.
Absolutely.
I did something interesting because when I had the baby and I spoke a lot about like PPD, postpartum, all of these things. So this boy, he messaged me and he said that I can't thank you enough for talking about those things, because I would have never, if I had never known, I would not have been there for my sister and my wife. But because I knew कि ये चीज़ें हैं, तो मुझे पता था कि अच्छा what they're going through या उनका क्या होता है, और वो identity वाला problem भी होता है and stuff. तो I think अगर शायद वही बात है ना, उनको पता ही नहीं है तो वो यही कहेंगे कि इन्हें क्या हो गया है.
पर उनके लिए बहुत convenient भी है ना पता होना.
Let's make it inconvenient, na? Let's let them know.
I don't think women's distress is always minimized. All historically be a baby. Unki, childbirth pain, all of those things. Women's distress, and there's so much research that says कि women की, for example, cancer detection जो होती है औरतों में, वो बहुत देर से होती है क्योंकि वो अपने symptoms और अपनी distress को minimize करती रहती हैं for a long time. और जो बहुत preventable और treatable cancer भी होता है, वो भी बहुत देर बाद जाके आइडेंटिफाई होता है, because something really big needs to happen for them to seek help. Because that's the attitude we have towards women's distress.
Oh my God, I recently read this post where he said कि in times of crisis, girls and women eat last, and that was basically related to the floods recently. कि please pay extra attention to them, because जो थोड़ा बहुत खाना भी आ रहा है ना, वो भाई और बाप खा रहे हैं. So that's really sad. And I am 100% sure this is happening.
Of course.
Yes.
All the time. And it's not even like people in our circles are oblivious to this.
No, but Fatima, ये तो हम चलो जिन areas में floods आए हैं, that's another socio-economic class, but this is happening even in like big homes and educated families where the best leftover, like the food is given to the son and the father and the botiyan, and like आप यही देख लो ना कि अच्छी बोटी किसको मिलेगी, ये वाली जो चीज़ होती है. And it's a very real discrimination.
It's embedded in patriarchy, right? Yes. आदमी जो हैं वो they are bringing the resources home, तो इसलिए they are entitled to more of it. अगर if they had to start paying for the services that women offer, तो फिर मैं पूछती है कि कितना वो है.
मतलब, और वैसे भी हांडी किसने पकाई है, उसको खाने दो अच्छी बोटी.
Like cooking in this heat and all of that is not easy. Like being a homemaker is not easy. It's a full-time job. It's probably even harder than a 9 to 5.
Yeah, it is. It is definitely very hard.
And I think वो औरतों की कभी भी acknowledge नहीं होती. The effort that goes in. It's like हाँ पूरा दिन घर पे ही बैठी रहती है, वो क्या कर रही है.
And especially when you have kids. You never sit.
Never.
At least you sit in your office.
And I get paid to do it.
And get paid to do it. Yes, valid. हाँ, so हाँ, like postpartum depression is a very real thing. और वो जो मैंने आपसे वो वाली बात पूछी, and when you said impulsive is actually scary, that's opened my eyes because I was like, oh, it's a fleeting thought. It's not something that you're having very seriously. Fleeting thought आई थी, उस वक्त frustrated थी, तो ये thought आई तो इस तरह
impulsivity में risk ये होता है कि आपको पता भी नहीं चलता और आप जाके छुरी उठा
देते हो.
Yeah. So that's also when somebody around you needs to be really kind of tuned into what's happening.
Haan.
And the most important thing to do about suicidality is to talk about it. Men में particularly high because lots of men die by suicide. The numbers are always higher for men because I think it's just harder to talk about it for men, especially amongst peers and stuff. Male friendships I've never understood. They're weird. They're not like female friendships at all.
They're not. There's something else.
तो क्या बातें करते? कुछ भी नहीं बात करते.
कुछ बात नहीं करते.
They're just weird.
Yeah. Okay. So another thing that I want to ask you is if you have, क्योंकि हमने बात की थी कि थेरेपी किसको करनी चाहिए, so if you think that you have had a traumatic experience and then you put it in a box and you put it somewhere in your head and you have, according to you, dealt with it, but do you think that is something that they've actually dealt with, or do you think that they should get therapy for it?
First thing I would say
because उनको डर होता है ना कि अच्छा खोलूँ इसको मैं बैठ के किसी के साथ unpack करूँ when I'm functioning.
पहली बात तो ये कि therapy is not the only way to heal. I will reiterate that. Lots of people find healing in spirituality, in religion, in working out, in swimming, in other body-based practices, relationships. Healing can happen in all sorts of places, right? So that's the first thing. दूसरा मैं ये कहूँगी कि अगर आपने compartmentalize किया हुआ अपना trauma या you've put it away, there's probably good reason for it, right? Okay. When you initially did it. For example, जब बच्चे traumatic events उनके साथ होते हैं तो वो it's just safer to compartmentalize it and put it away. But at some point you realize that's not serving you and it's cropping up in other ways. When that starts to happen, then it's important to get help. Yeah. The thing about trauma is it's two people can be in the exact same situation and have different responses to it, right? So trauma is an internal experience. It's not that two children who are hit by sticks the same number of times are going to experience it identically. They're not. Right? So people's trauma is a subjective experience, which is a good thing because while we can't change the beating necessarily, we can change the internal experience.
ठीक.
So that's a good thing to bring to attention. दो चीज़ें मैं इसमें कहूँगी कि unprocessed trauma जो है more often than not will somehow manifest in the body. Right? So
कहते हैं get stored in your body.
Yes, it is. Absolutely. I am that it's definitely stored in your body. Chronic illnesses, IBS एक notorious जो है ना diagnosis, वो जिसका डॉक्टर्स को समझ नहीं आती वो IBS है, and more often than not that's psychological.
Yeah, agreed.
There is a lot of other just fibromyalgia का होता है जो उसको I think it's also called chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia. I think they're the same. I might be wrong. Please correct me if I am. But that's another one of those diagnoses जो वो होते हैं. TMJ, which is you must know TMJ, right? So वो भी होता है. So इस तरह की चीज़ें they are stored in your body. They impact your health. But the third thing, and I don't think and this is by the way going to be the new thing that people are going to talk about next year and the year after that, is the intergenerational transmission of trauma, right? So what is not processed by one generation is passed down as a present. It's your emotional heritage to the next. And it is passed down again and again and again till somebody is ready to feel the pain.
Yeah.
और वो बंदा जब आपके थेरेपी रूम में आता है ना, आप कहते हैं कि ये किधर से आ रहा है, like this doesn't where is this coming, and then you understand that there are
this is generational
pieces of it, like, and it's so like relevant to our context because we had the partition, which was a traumatic time, and with my own family history I've been making sense of it, like pieces of information I got like very recently. My mother's like, हाँ नाना अबू जिस ट्रेन पे थे उसमें everybody on that train was murdered except people in their compartment when they were. I was like, how do you think that impacted like him? And so a lot of those things make sense. and things will be passed down. So that's definitely something. The 71 who are prisoners of war jo usme the unki families mein, so you will see these things. These are just, but like the floods, natural disasters, that's also traumatic. The
earthquake, yeah.
So yeah,
all of
process
these
it. If you're not, then you're passing it down.
Yeah. Okay, so Fatima, हमने बात की थी on joint family systems और उसकी जो toxicity होती है और हमारे culture में जो issues उसी की वजह से हैं. So because a lot of these like girls, they're living in these joint family systems और वहाँ पर उनको consistent like ये abuse से गुजरना पड़ रहा है और toxicity है and ताने पड़ रहे हैं, attack किया जा रहा है, and there is no escape because you're living in it. Yeah. So how does one sort of deal with that?
So again, हर family system में dysfunction भी होता है, issues भी होते हैं. I think what makes it a little bit more challenging is when you're moving into a joint family after you're married, you are moving into somebody else's, like you're the outsider in that, right? For a long time. You cannot change the system, you cannot change the dynamics that have existed many years before you even came in, but you can do some stuff to manage it for yourself. For example, again, something very basic as boundaries. So अगर कोई गुस्सा कर रहा है या चीख रहा है whatever, या you know कि their rage is uncontrollable, go into your room at that point, sort of remove yourself from the situation. So little things like that. Don't try to change कि उनका गुस्सा ना आए या मैं उनको गुस्सा ना कराऊँ, whatever, but kind of remove yourself from the situation. Continue to work on your communication with your partner, because I know this is it's kind of obvious, but it's still not said enough, but you're in that family because of the person you've married, right? Like आपने खानदान से शादी नहीं की, आपने इस इंसान से शादी की है, and they're the common denominator. So kind of decide what battles they're going to pick, what you're going to let go of, and what can be changed and what can't be changed.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Fatima. Thank you so much. It was very insightful. A lot of learning for me. So many things, and I'm sure this is super helpful for a lot of people.
I really hope so.
There's a lot of gap between the public and knowing from, personally from a therapist about a lot of these things that I want to put out there, and you help me do that. So thank you for coming again.
Always happy to be here.
And I'll have you again.
I would love to be here.
Maybe with a different set of questions and things we can discuss and talk about.
Sounds good.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. I hope you learned something. I hope this will help you, and I hope that we were able to answer some of your questions. And please don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave comments. And you can leave questions here as well that maybe we can address at another point. We'll be reading the comments and maybe address them in the next time I have Fatima over. Thank you so much, and Allah Hafiz.